Over the nearly 20-year history of the Battlefield franchise, there have been several great maps worthy of praise. A few of these go on to become legendary, icons themselves of the Battlefield series, and appear time and time again through game engine upgrades and subsequent iterations. One map, and specifically one version of that map, is among the greatest of Battlefield and the one that launched the series into greatness: Wake Island, Battlefield 1942. Wake Island has been remade more times than any other map, with 9 total appearances. But I am not singling out the original map because it was the original, but because it was the best. As with many other versions of Wake, the map is a 5-flag conquest assault map. There are the north and south bases, the north village, the beach, and the airfield. For the US defenders, a Sherman tank spawns at the north village, the airfield, and the south base. 3 aircraft spawn at the airfield, 1 F-4U Corsair and 2 SBD Dauntless bombers, one of which is a torpedo variant. All of these vehicles would spawn a Japanese variant should that flag be taken by the attackers. Around the island there are scattered 40mm flak guns to defend against aircraft. It's important to note that flak guns in Battlefield 1942 were far stronger against aircraft than in most BF games. This kept plane dominance to a minimum, except against exceptional pilots. Also spread around the island were several defense cannons, used against landing craft and the aircraft carrier and the destroyer, which, to now note the largest difference between Wake Island and Battlefield 1942 and nearly all future versions, were fully usable and could be moved around the map. Emphasis must be made of the drivable ships, because not only did they act as a centerpiece that focused the action at a single point, but they were pivotal to make every round different. No round of Wake was ever the same. Players chose where they wanted to strike on the island. To give a few scenarios: 1. The carrier and destroyer could stay together as they moved around the island. Staying together allowed the carrier's AA guns to cover the destroyer from planes, as well as shield landing craft. 2. The 2 ships could split up and head to different sides of the island. This opened 2 different lanes of attack instead of just 1, assuming no flags had already been taken by the attackers. 3. The destroyer could go its own way around the island, shelling and dispersing landing craft, while the carrier gets moved to the furthest corners of the map, well outside of visible range to safeguard it. Alternatively, it was not uncommon to see the Japanese carrier park itself just outside the US airfield, and use its AA guns on US planes taking off. However, this was equalized, as doing this put it in range of the US def guns, as well as island AA guns which might countercamp the enemy Japanese planes on the carrier. While these are just some examples of what might happen in the game, it highlights exactly what went wrong with future versions of Wake. Dynamic gameplay made the map fun. Static ships have been a detriment in every case. Take Battlefield 2's Wake Island for example. The US team had a mini, uncappable island spawn and an unmovable aircraft carrier. Everyone knew where it was at all times because it wasn't going anywhere. Helicopters and jets knew where to go to camp. Jets in particular were a huge problem, especially when the attackers had no flags. Chinese jets could kill full rib boats in a single pass and wipe out transports with ease. Frustratingly for players, but amusing for pilots, was dropping bombs on the carrier while players waited for planes or the next transport, often getting 10+ kills per bomb. Most importantly, just as in future Wake Island iterations, the lanes of attack were always the same. The south base and the village were always the initial targets. There was little tension or incentive to be worried about other flags, and little incentive to pay attention. In fact, Battlefield 5's version even made this problem far worse by stacking the static ships closer to the village and giving each team a ton of tanks, creating a grind and a follow-up steamroll around the island. It is a far cry from the original Triumph, Speaking of which, let's get back to it. The Japanese attackers start with an A6M0 and an Ikevel dive bomber, in addition to the carrier and destroyer. For those of you wondering how strong the destroyer was, rest assured, this was not the overpowered monstrosity that most players think of from Battlefield 1. The shells had a massive drop. The spread was insanely inaccurate, and it had no zoom or targeting system. Yes, the splash was strong, but damage was concentrated toward the center of the impact, and given the difficulty in aiming it, it was deemed more frustrating to be against due to the suppression than the actual direct threat. Unless of course you spawned on the beach, in which case you were fucked. Still, nothing was more satisfying than shooting a plane down with one of the main guns. Being a conquest assault map, once the US team had no flags and the entire team was eliminated, the game was over and Japan won. However, with no 3D spotting, sometimes catching those last few soldiers became a hunt before they captured an empty flag. The US team could achieve a victory by reducing the Japanese tickets to 0, or eliminating the Japanese spawn points by using planes and def guns to sink both the carrier and the destroyer. This created back and forth, tense, interesting games where teams focused on the flags and fought hard over the airfield. Being the first Battlefield game ever, and the first map ever released, this map was not without its flaws. The flag capture system of Battlefield 1942 was primitive, and even having a single enemy within a flag's radius would gray out the flag. Modern Battlefield games have a superior system which would have been great back in the day. Additionally, a few smaller boats to traverse the bay would have been good, considering players frequently made the long swim between South Base and the village. Lastly, the resources gained by the attackers once they captured several flags often became too much, a problem which has plagued Battlefield conquest modes to this day. The Japanese attackers should not have had access to so many tanks and planes once certain flags were captured, as it made holding that final US flag miserable, especially with the destroyer involved. But if one thing is true, it is that amazing positive mentality that players had on this map. With every round being different, players fought hard, but once a team was capped out, they accepted it and moved on to the next round. This dynamic gameplay solidified Battlefield 1942's Wake Island as a fan favorite early on, with many 24/7 Wake Island servers and even entire communities being built around the map, such as Tweedle and Team FHA. Not all fan favorite maps are good, but Wake was damn near immaculate considering how brand spanking new the series was. It is a testament to great sandbox design and a solid attempt to balance multiplayer gameplay mechanics. It could only be called a significant disappointment that future Battlefield titles never let Wake live up to its original glory.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.